Okay.
All right.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the closing session of the second annual Youth Environmental Summit. I can't believe that 4 months worth of work is coming to an end in an hour. We had a couple workshops before this today, but Senator Chris Coons has graciously agreed to speak with us and answer a few questions right now. After his talk, Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hallong has sent us some remarks due to the technical difficulties we had experienced on Monday. I welcome both of them. Then I'll announce the scavenger hunt gift card winners and play the closing remarks of some of the YES student leaders. This is a bittersweet moment, but I'm so glad you all get to experience this with us. When I first started working on the summit, I had no idea what it would look like. The pandemic had been going on for over half a year, and all I could think of was the first YES conference. How lively, fun, and educational it was. I was scared that this year's conference could not compare. I doubted that we could come close to recreating that experience virtually. I approached the first day of the summit with a little bit of fear and apprehension. I was scared that I would be speaking to a blank screen. But I was amazed by the attendance and support. More than 100 people joined, and I met new people and made new friends. I was so happy. I realized that instead of recreating last year's experience, we had made something new. We hit over 250 attendees overall, and I hope we helped everyone attending realize that you can always fight for climate action or whatever you're passionate about, no matter the circumstances. Our event was possible due to the YES student leader team who put extraordinary effort and time into this. I want to quickly list all the students involved and recognize their efforts. So thank you to Joshua McCrae, Marilyn Corbett, Deborah Duvall, Vansh Kapoor, Austin Sarker-Young, Megan Ursulo, Piper Jenkins, Claire Andreessen, Natalie Yang, Neha Viragundam, David Yan, Glorious Bombo, Pearl Malik, Simreen Ahmed, Pir Paulo Argueta, Nidhi Patel, Shreya Boyapati, Alexander Williams, Claire Sella, Nevaeh Miller, Saki Desai, Joshua Dibal, Hasina Parker, and Nithya Patel. Thank you for all your help. To the adult advisors who guided us, we appreciate you all. To the workshop speakers, thank you for educating us all about the various ways we can be involved in the fight for climate action. To the keynote speakers, Senator Chris Coons, Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hallong, and Jack Thompson, thank you for showing your support for our cause. To the sponsors, who you can view on the screen right now, give me 1 second. Thank you for believing in us, supporting us, and making this summit possible. Finally, to all the attendees, thank you for making our event a success and taking the initiative to learn more about one of the biggest threats to the planet today. I hope you take what you learned this week and use it to reflect on your actions. I hope that you change at least one aspect of your life, even if it is a minor one. Thank you for coming. Now Austin, one of my fellow YES student leaders, is going to introduce Senator Chris Coons.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have the great honor of introducing Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He is a founding co-chair of the Senate Climate Solutions Caucus and a co-chair of the International Conservation Caucus. He has led several pieces of legislation to combat climate change, support clean energy, and conserve our lands and wildlife. Before entering government, Senator Coons was a Newcastle County executive and an attorney for W.L. Gore and Associates. He graduated from Amherst College with a BA in chemistry and political science and earned a law degree from Yale Law School and a master's in ethics from Yale Divinity School. Without any further ado, you all know him, the great Senator of Delaware.
Thank you, Austin. Thank you so much for that generous introduction, and to Kunmani and everybody else who's been so central to organizing this YES conference. You've done an amazing thing here. The range of programs and speakers, the number of sponsors, the depth and interesting agenda that you've put together is hugely impressive. I've been involved in lots of different ways over the decades with different student activists and organizing efforts. And I have to tell you, this is one of the most impressive things I have ever seen done in my 30 years of public life here in Delaware. So while some of you may be sad that this year's conference is coming to an end, I know that you will have successfully inspired significant and bold steps by some of the hundreds of attendees, and that the lessons you've learned from this year's conference will go on to make next year's conference even more compelling, and to help launch many of you into careers in service, civic engagement, and activism. Just earlier today in the United States Senate in the Capitol, I once again co-hosted a bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus event. We have 14 senators, 7 of them Republicans, 7 of them Democrats. And one of the things that is positive and exciting to me about this is that even though as a scientist, as an activist, as an environmentalist, I've been clear that the climate has been changing, that it is an existential threat to our planet, and that we need to take decisive action. For years, for most of my years in the Senate, we've had no Republicans willing to stand up and publicly say, as every member of our caucus does, climate change is real. Science has proven it. Climate change is largely caused by human activity, and we must take bold action to address it. So today we actually heard from the head of the Business Roundtable, Josh Bolton, and the CEO of a company that does a lot to retrofit major commercial buildings to make them more energy efficient and to try and move towards carbon zero major commercial buildings, a company called Johnson Controls. And to my surprise and delight, at the end of our hour-long conversation today, a senator who I probably shouldn't name because he hasn't announced this publicly said that he's going to be working on a carbon fee bill. We've looked at things that we can do in the natural world to encourage changes in practices in forestry and agriculture. We've looked at things we can do in baseload power generation to decarbonize the electric power sector. We've looked at what we can do in the industrial sector with things like steel and cement manufacturing. And we've looked at what we can do with transportation, with automobiles and buses and trains. But out of all the presentations, the 22 meetings and events that we've done as a caucus in the last year, there is a consistent theme from activists, from scientists, from policy leaders, and from business leaders. We have to put a price on carbon if we're going to shift the incentives in the market, and if we're going to incentivize dramatic new deployments of carbon neutral and clean energy technologies. That's the biggest move I think we can make. Let me just close my brief opening remarks by thanking you, by saying that the optimism, the engagement, the determination I'm seeing, not just from young Americans like you, but from young people all over the world, is what inspires me to act. I hear from my 3 college-age children regularly about their concern, their interest in climate change. They were part of the climate strike. They were engaged in climate activism. And one of the things on trips that we've taken overseas that they've pointed out to me is the degree of plastic marine pollution washing up on beaches and fouling our seas all over the world. Last year, a bipartisan group of us came together, wrote a law, got it introduced and signed into law, and then funded it to create a new $75 million U.S. marine plastic debris fund, and then challenged some of our closest allies around the world to work with us to develop technical solutions to marine and ocean plastic pollution. As Austin mentioned in the introduction, I've also done a lot of bipartisan work around protecting wild spaces and wild animals. I'm working with Senator Portman on the End Wildlife Trafficking Act, which we hope to introduce later this spring. I've got a lot of other bills I'd be happy to talk about, but frankly, I'm more here to answer your questions than to talk about what little I've been able to get done in a decade in the Senate. More than anything, what matters is what you're doing, which is showing passionate engagement, learning about important subjects, getting clearer about how you're going to live your lives in a more sustainable way, and demanding of the generation that's currently your elected representatives decisive action here in the state of Delaware and around our country. So thank you so much for the chance to be on with you this evening, and I'm excited to hear your questions.
Hi. Thank you for your remarks. I think Austin is going to get started.
Yes. Our first question is a very general question. So, did you grow up in Delaware? And if so, what is your general perspective of the state itself?
I moved here when I was 6, but I've lived here virtually all of my life since then. I spent some time out of state, going to college and graduate school, and living and working in Africa and in Europe on different occasions. But the vast majority of my life has been spent here in Delaware. One of the things that struck me when I had children of my own was that, looking back on it, my experience with the Delaware Nature Society out in Hockessin, spending summers going to nature camps, and my experience in the Boy Scouts — scouting was then known as Boy Scouting — gave me real exposure to wild spaces when I was young, when I was in elementary school and middle school, and helped me understand the importance of wetlands and of wild spaces. By the time I got to be older, I did a lot of hiking and outdoor adventuring. And then I got to do some things in college that were really pretty remarkable. Just this last week, I've reconnected with a guy I was friends with in college. We climbed Mount Kenya together, literally at the equator in the country of Kenya, 35 years ago. And one of the things he pointed out to me, he sent me an image of Mount Kenya. It is striking that when we climbed it, this would have been in 1984, it was covered in ice and snow. It was almost literally covered in glaciers, top to bottom. If you look at a picture of Mount Kenya today, it's almost all rock. There's virtually no snow or ice left on the face of this equatorial mountain. That's not scientific proof that climate change is real, but it's certainly a striking thing from my childhood that someone just today was reminding me about. And one of the great things about growing up participating in Delaware Nature Society and Boy Scouting events and in community events was a realization that Delaware is the lowest lying state in America. It's the lowest mean elevation state, and that we have to do more to preserve our wetlands and the green infrastructure that will protect us from sea level rise. So in my role in the Senate, I've been working hard to protect things like Prime Hook or the Nanticoke River in southwestern, all the way down in the southwestern corner of Sussex, or Prime Hook on the Delaware Bay areas, both inland and at our coasts and borders, where we need to do more to preserve our wetlands and protect our water quality.
Thank you. So the next question was actually, what do you believe students can do in order to make a tangible change for the environment? And then there's another question in the chat that relates to that, which is, what advice would you provide to students on the best way to advocate for bills and issues that concern them the most?
Well, first, be informed. Participating in this summit is a great way to get informed about what the issues are. What are the pressing issues? What are the concerns that move you and that excite and inspire you? Second is to get connected, to join forces, to get partnered up with other people who share your values and your priorities and who want to get engaged. And then third is to pick some concrete and specific things that you'll do about your life, about how you'll change what you do and what your family does, your practices around energy consumption, around recycling, around consumerism, around whether you're going to buy clothes that are, for example, recycled or disposable, whether or not you're going to consume things that are full of plastic packaging, or whether they're packaged in ways that are more sustainable. There's lots and lots of things we can do individually, but then also be engaged in collective action. Try and encourage your mosque or your synagogue, your church, your school, your community or your neighborhood to look at lower carbon sources of energy, to look at more sustainable forms of transportation. And last, make sure that you're engaged in politics. Reach out and make your voice heard. Even if you're not of voting age yet, politicians like me know that you soon will be, and that your passionate opinions, when shared in a respectful but engaging way, directly with your elected officials and with your teachers and with your community leaders and with your family, can absolutely make a difference. The engagement of so many young Americans, so many people around the world, has actually moved the needle, has actually made progress possible.
Thank you. That's really inspiring to see, hear, especially as a young person. Because I know sometimes our work can feel futile and like not like it matters. So thanks a lot. Austin, do you want to ask the next question?
Sure. The next question pertains to what changes to improve the environment are you focusing on, and I may add to that, we as a nation focusing on for the next few years?
Well, thank you for that question, Austin. One of the most exciting things to me is that we have just succeeded in electing in Joe Biden, not just someone I'm proud is from Delaware, not just someone who was a great senator and vice president, but someone with a long record and history of action on climate, and someone who ran on the most progressive climate change agenda or climate action agenda of any successful presidential candidate. The contrast from his predecessor, from our immediate past president, could not be sharper. He largely rejected the science of climate change, shut down efforts at federal science and research, withdrew us from the Paris Climate Agreement, and defunded efforts to invest in cleaner technologies. President Biden has already made some dramatic steps in reversing that record and in moving us forward. I was part of a cocktail reception, yes, virtual, where we were all looking at each other through our screens, with the ambassadors of most of the nations of Europe last Friday. They were welcoming the United States back into the Paris Climate Accord. The Paris Climate Accord has more nations signed onto it than any agreement in human history. I think it's 191, if I'm not mistaken. And this fall in Glasgow, Scotland, at COP26, the Conference of Parties, the 26th Conference of Parties concerned about climate, we're going to be challenged by our allies and partners to make more commitments, stronger commitments for what we're going to do around climate here at home and abroad. I mentioned a few of the bills that I'm going to continue to push. I introduced the first bipartisan carbon fee bill in the Senate with my colleague and friend, Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona, two Congresses standards. For example, we were just talking about one of these today on that Climate Solutions Caucus call. The United States government is our nation's largest landlord. There are more federal buildings. The federal government owns and runs and leases more buildings than any other single entity in the country. And so I sent a letter to President Biden urging him to issue a challenge to all the managers of all of our federal buildings to go through a competitive procurement process to make those buildings more energy efficient. Some of them are 10, 20, 50 years old, some even older than that. And when we invest in energy efficiency retrofits, we can reduce the carbon footprint, reduce the total energy cost, and extend the life service and the life cycle of those buildings. It also creates clean energy jobs here in the United States. Those are jobs that can't be outsourced, that have to be done here in our country. It also helps to change the perception of federal workplaces, makes them safer and healthier and more modern and more human places to work. So I've seen that work in buildings that I've been a part of when I was here in county government in Newcastle County, and I'm hoping to bring that solution to the federal system. I worked on a bill that would accelerate that process, retrofitting federal buildings last December. It got signed into law. It was one of the last bills President Trump signed into law. And one of the points I was making today was the federal government buildings are overwhelmingly empty right now. We're in the middle of a pandemic. If you're going to tear out the lights and the HVAC systems and retrofit them, this is a great time to do it.
On the topic of the pandemic, how has the coronavirus affected our state environmentally? And do you think it's a positive or negative impact? Because right now what you were talking about sounded negative.
Well, you know, there are some ways globally in which the pandemic has lessened the harmful environmental impact of human activity. There are fewer people flying. There's fewer people driving. There are some places like the canals of Venice where the water's clear for the first time in years. One of the really striking things, though, is that if you look at our total carbon dioxide emissions, our total greenhouse gas emissions this year, They haven't gone down anywhere near as much as they need to go down for us to avoid catastrophic climate change. So even in a year where we had dramatic drops in how many people are flying and driving and how much industrial activity there is, we're not meeting our targets. That's the reminder that we can't do this simply by being just a little bit less active. We're going to have to make fundamental changes in what sorts of fuels we use, what sorts of systems we use, how we decarbonize our economy. Overwhelmingly, though, frankly, the pandemic has been negative from an environmental perspective. Obviously, it's been negative from a health and a social perspective. Students are not in school together. Students are not in university classes together. Most of the folks who work for me are working from home and have been for most of a year at this point. And it means lots and lots and lots of disposable masks, disposable face shields, lots of disruptions that have produced more garbage and more environmental dislocation on the longer side. It's also meant huge amounts of wasted food that wasn't able to be harvested and processed and fed to people. So, on the net balance, I'd say there are some areas, mostly in emissions, where it's been a net positive for the environment. But in terms of pollution and plastic and the footprint, I'd say it's a net negative.
That was really insightful. Do you think we would have time for one more question, Senator?
Absolutely. I am happy to take several more questions until you tell me it's time to go.
Okay. Austin, do you want to read the next question from the comment?
Yes. So, at the federal level, not just on the Delaware state level, what is being done to protect a particular part of the environment, the nation's soil?
So there are, I actually was just talking about this with Tom Vilsack. He's the former governor of Iowa. Iowa has 99 counties. We only have 3. Iowa is one of the most agriculturally intensive states in America. And they have lots and lots of farms growing lots of different things. One of the things they do is produce a lot of corn that gets turned into ethanol. And we were talking about the intensity of both animal agriculture and some of its negative environmental consequences, and the intensity of ethanol related or renewable agriculture for renewable fuels. There are significant existing U.S. Department of Agriculture programs around soil conservation and soil health. And as a member of the committee that funds a lot of our government activities, I have pushed for more money to go into soil conservation and to help educate farmers around practices involving cover crops or crop rotation, managing runoff, managing, frankly, manure. Here in Delaware, how we handle chicken litter, which usually goes by a more colorful name, is a big concern because, we're part of, most of southern Delaware is part of either the Delaware Bay watershed or the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Delaware overall has done a really good job of managing manure runoff and managing soil health. But to go back to that Bipartisan Climate Solutions Caucus meeting today, Senator Braun of Indiana, conservative Republican, and Senator Stabenow of Michigan, a liberal Democrat, she's the chair of the Agriculture Committee. We are about to introduce a bill called Growing Climate Solutions Act. That's going to empower the Department of Agriculture to set up essentially carbon marketplaces to incentivize America's farmers and ranchers and foresters to get engaged in carbon sequestration, to change some of their agricultural practices, and that get incentivized for it, compensated for it. Frankly, historically, the single greatest thing that removed carbon dioxide from the atmosphere was trees. Because carbon dioxide, as you all know, is absolutely critical to photosynthesis, to growing things. A bill that I'm about to introduce is called the Trillion Trees Act, and it's going to incentivize the planting of 1 trillion trees nationally and globally. It will help with producing better cover for ground that is otherwise being lost through runoff. It'll help by reducing temperatures and improving the natural environment, improving biodiversity. But more than anything, 1 trillion trees would help by literally sucking carbon dioxide out of the air. That's not enough to solve our challenges, but it's an important thing to do. So, Austin, all of these are connected to soil health because growing things don't grow well without soil health. And there are terrific programs both in the Delaware Department of Agriculture and the U.S. Department of Agriculture to help us be more mindful of and to be better stewards of soil health.
Austin, do you want to comment? I saw you unmuted.
Yeah, I just wanted to briefly note how I can relate to a good number of the comments that you made, being a Boy Scout in New Jersey before coming to Delaware and becoming a Boy Scout in Delaware. And I'd like to especially thank you for like ripping out lights here or there. And I'd like to thank you very much for your time. Do you have any time for a couple more questions, or are we holding you back too long?
How about we do 2 more questions? I'd be happy to.
Okay. So the next question was, this is from Randy. Every major weather event is a learning opportunity for students and teachers to think about climate change. Do you want to comment about Texas or Delaware's shoreline?
Well, thank you. Thank you for that question. Look, I think people who were climate skeptics 10 and 20 years ago, people of my generation, some of the senators I served with who were insisting that climate change wasn't real, that has gotten harder and harder to maintain as a position as we have had the worst hurricane seasons and the worst forest fire seasons and some of the worst tornado seasons year after year after year as the record temperatures have gone up and up. So first, there was a record number of billion-dollar disasters last year, natural disasters that cost $1 billion or more in damage. What we're seeing right now in Texas in terms of the tragic impact of the deep freeze that really shut down their power grid is some of the risks of deregulation, of not preparing for climate change and for weather weirdness. My friend Sheldon Whitehouse, a great senator from Rhode Island, has said on the floor of the Senate recently, remember, it's not global warming, because we had a colleague who was saying, it's so cold in Texas, there can't be global warming. He said, it's not global warming, it's climate weirdness. It means that as the world average temperature goes up, we are going to have more storms, more intense storms. We're going to have sea level rise, and we're going to have real challenges. And some of those challenges can be freak ice storms as well as freak heat waves. So I agree with you. It's a teachable moment. And those of us who are concerned about climate change here in Delaware need to be calling for more action to preserve our coastline and to make our state more climate resilient.
Thank you. Austin, do you want to read the next question?
The next question is... yes. What can we do to change our infrastructure that currently depends so much on fossil fuels?
A great question. If you look at what the United Kingdom has done, Great Britain, the UK, they have decarbonized their baseload power generating sector faster and more thoroughly than any other developed nation. They're a good model for us to follow. Over the last 20 years, there's been a significant change away from coal-fired power plants and towards natural gas-fired power plants. And there's several reasons for it. One is, frankly, that coal is dirty. It's very hard to scrub the emissions out of the stack of a coal-fired power plant. And that causes problems with asthma, with acid rain, and with climate change. It's also, frankly, that fracking has produced abundant and cheap natural gas here in the United States. And technological developments have made natural gas power plants more and more and more efficient. So we've had a shift in terms of how our base load power is generated so that it is so that it's polluting less. But let me make one last point, if I might, before I conclude. I have a great friend, Senator Shaheen from New Hampshire, and she is the champion of our Energy Efficiency Caucus. She reminds me all the time that the most energy efficient power is the power we never consume. So she's been leading efforts for years that just got signed into law recently to incentivize energy efficiency retrofits in private homes, in commercial buildings, in government buildings. If we make our homes and our lives more energy efficient, that means we don't have to produce more power in the first place. So turning down your thermostat, turning off your lights, being more mindful about energy consumption, and encouraging your family to invest in more energy efficient appliances. In the end, that's in some ways the best thing we can do to reduce pollution from power generation in the United States.
Thank you, Senator Coons. We really appreciate it, you giving your time for us and educating us about what we can do in your own perspective. There's a lot of thank you comments in the chat if you want to read them. But again, thank you so much. And we really appreciate you just coming here and inspiring us all. So thank you. Oh, you're muted.
It's been wonderful being on with you. You've done an amazing job organizing this conference. It is genuinely inspiring and encouraging to me to see the great work you've done, to hear and see the questions from the attendees, all the wonderful sponsors and other speakers. Thank you so much for the chance to be on with you tonight. I look forward to hearing from you again.
Same here. Have a great rest of your day. All right. So the next speaker is actually Lieutenant Governor Bethany Hallong. She was supposed to speak on Monday, but there were technical difficulties. So she has a video. But Ms. Hallong initially served as a state representative and a state senator before she began serving as lieutenant governor in 2017. She's also served as a